The FBI and the Secret Portal to Another World. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Reports of a witch had caught the eye of the Moon Mist Division. Several witnesses had claimed to have seen a woman dressed like a witch hovering through the woods. Special agents Lydia Marsh and Kono Castabello were sent to Ulster County, New York to investigate. A year had passed since the two agents had met following the terrible events of the massacre at the Coffin Falls police station. Since then, Agent Castabello had been studying and training in the ways of the Kaibo. As the two agents arrived to the forest where a witch had allegedly been sighted, they took note of the fog. A strange fog which seemed to glow covered the forest. The agents were well aware of the fact that the appearance of a bizarre fog often coincided with reports of the supernatural. The agents had encountered this ominous fog in places where vampires or some other supernatural being had settled down or nested for an extended period of time. The ethereal fog seemed to have grown denser as Agents Marsh and Castabello entered deeper into the woods. Agent Castabello pointed toward a tree branch and said, "Hey, take a look at this." While attentively observing the peculiar handcrafted objects made of sticks dangling from a tree branch, Agent Marsh said, "Yes, very interesting. This is the work of a witch. She's been very busy. These fluchwatten are dangling from many of these trees." Fluchwatten are handcrafted objects that have had a curse or a hex placed on them. Witches often shape these objects into pentagrams or various occult symbols. The effect of the Fluchwatten depends on the type of spell cast upon it. Sometimes the witch will use these hexed items for defensive purposes. Other times they are used to attract potential victims to the area. They are commonly used to instill fear. Agent Castabello knelt to the ground as he discovered what appeared to be a crude altar surrounded by various animal bones. As he used a stick to investigate, he said, "We're close. This is definitely a dark altar. It looks like some of these sacrifices were made recently. The witch isn't far." Agent Marsh took off her backpack, opened it up, and took out steel shackles. Engraved symbols covered the shackles. These special symbols gave the shackles the power to bind a witch and prevent her from using magic. The tricky part, however, was getting the shackles on the witch and safely securing her. Cackling was heard in the distance. Agents Kono Castabello and Lydia Marsh stood back to back. The fog made it difficult to see further than 10 yards. A foul wind began to blow. The fog took on a greenish glow. Emerging from the greenish fog, the witch had arrived. The witch was floating in the fog. It was a chilling sight. She didn't appear to be old or ugly. On the contrary, she looked young and beautiful. As the witch began to say a spell, she started to choke. Agent Castabello was extending his right arm toward her as he closed his hand into a fist. He was using a telekinesis skill that he had learned. He was squeezing her throat from a safe distance. Agent Castabello continued to choke her as he used his Kaibo abilities to bring her to the ground. Once brought to the ground, Agent Marsh ran over and bound the witch in the witch-proof shackles. With the witch safely restrained by the shackles, Agent Castabello stopped using the Kaibo choke power. The witch gasped for air. After she had caught her breath, her eyes grew wide and her mouth was agape. She was confused and in complete shock. Looking at Agent Castabello, the witch said, "What is the meaning of this? How do you have the Kaibo choke power? I have heard that the Kaibo have been dead for many centuries." Raising his eyebrows, Agent Castabello answered, "Well, lady, you heard wrong. Didn't anyone ever tell you not to believe everything that you hear? The rumors of the final demise of the Kaibo are greatly exaggerated." The two agents escorted the witch to their car, and they then drove back to Moon Mist headquarters. This top-secret government facility is located in the Hudson Valley. Hidden deep in a forest that was marked as private property, the facility went unnoticed. The appearance of the property was unremarkable. It simply looked like a large forest with a medium-sized cabin located at the center of the property. It certainly didn't look like an FBI office, much less the headquarters of a top-secret division of the Bureau. However, looks can be deceiving. The cabin in the woods even seemed to be quite ordinary on the inside. Everything about the cabin was as you would expect, until you went into the basement and accessed a secret elevator. The elevator was hidden in a secret passage. In order to access the elevator, a retina scan was required. The elevator went down 31 feet below the house. 31 feet below the seemingly ordinary cabin in the woods was the location of Moon Mist headquarters. The underground facility was large and well-staffed. The security was state-of-the-art, and it was heavily fortified. An elite security team recruited from the Special Forces of the United States military regarding the facility. This security team was given the name Mist Force. The reason for the formation of Mist Force and the strange location of Moon Mist is the same. 31 feet below the ground was where a strange, shimmering orange and green light had been discovered. It was a portal to another world. The FBI had learned that vampires, witches, malevolent inhuman spirits, and other dangerous creatures had been entering into our world through this mysterious portal. The creatures had been passing through the portal and climbing up through a tunnel to the surface. After the FBI had confirmed this, the U.S. government quietly built Moon Mist headquarters around it. The secret portal to another world was located at the center of the underground facility. Steel and concrete walls were erected around the portal, and a bulletproof glass enclosure was erected inside of that outer barrier. The fortified glass enclosure was intended to provide a measure of safety for observational purposes. Although monstrous creatures from another world had been able to come and go through the portal and pass between worlds, no man had been able to do the same. The greatest minds hadn't been able to find a way to get a drone through the portal. Moon Mist had to figure out a way to break through the portal. They needed to see what was on the other side. Beating an enemy is heavily reliant upon gathering intelligence. They also figured that if they could learn the secrets of how the portal works, then maybe they'd be able to close it down. It was for these reasons that the FBI sent out agents Kono Castabello and Lydia Marsh to capture and bring back a witch. The witch was brought into the Moon Mist facility and secured in a room by agents Castabello and Marsh. The security of the residents of the Hudson Valley, and possibly of the entire planet, hinged upon what would happen next. The interrogation was about to begin. The enchanted shackles remained on the witch as she walked around in a padded room with a two-way mirror. Agent Marsh entered the interrogation room first. Agent Marsh sat down and said, "I'm Lydia. I can help you. You have a choice. You can answer a few questions, and I can give you access to a portal to take you back to your world, or you can refuse to cooperate and rot in a prison cell." The witch grinned and said, "Why would I trust you?" Lydia answered, "We could have killed you rather than bring you here. We could have made you very uncomfortable on your trip here, but instead we've treated you more humanely than you probably deserved." The witch looked at her shackles and said, "You call these barbaric chains hospitality? You only kept me alive because you want me for something. What's to stop you from killing me after you get the answers that you need? What's to come of me once I'm no longer of use to you?" Lydia smiled and said, "Those are wise and fair questions. Honor and human decency are the reasons that we won't betray an arrangement with you. That is, as long as you honor your side of the deal, then we'll honor our side of the bargain. I understand that witches enjoy making bargains." The witch squinted her eyes and responded, "Yes, we do love a good bargain. I suppose that it wouldn't hurt to hear you out. What kind of answers do you want?" Lydia folded her hands together and asked, "How did you get through the portal? Why won't the portal allow us through it? What can we do to open the portal?" The pretty witch tapped her fingers against the table and said, "Are you crazy? If the rulers of my world learned that I taught you how to cross over between dimensions at will, they'd ensure that I'd receive a fate worse than death." Lydia softly bit her lip and said, "No one has to know that you helped us. We'll keep it a secret. You can have your freedom in the place that you belong." The witch leaned forward and replied, "They will know. They always find things out. They have eyes and ears all over the place. As for my freedom, why do you think that I came here? I wanted to be free from the tyranny of the ruler of my world. I came here and I've harmed no one. I might have offered a few animal sacrifices as part of my religious practice, and I might have seduced a few young men, but I haven't hurt anyone." Lydia raised her eyebrows and said, "That's very interesting. If what you say is true, why did you scare the people that you encountered in the woods? Why did you try to attack my partner and I today?" The witch smirked and answered, "Is it a crime to play a trick on someone? Can a girl have some fun? I didn't hurt anyone, and I didn't intend to kill you or your handsome partner. I was simply trying to have a laugh and scare you away." Lydia got up out of her chair and said, "If you don't want to help us, and if you really don't want to go back home, then I think we're done here." Agent Kono Castabello entered the room, sat down, and said, "Hello, my name's Kono. What's your name?" The witch smiled as her eyes grew large and answered, "Hi, Kono. My name's Annabelle. You really are charming, even when you aren't Kaibo choking me." Kono briefly brushed his right hand through his hair and replied, "Oh, that. Yes, it was a necessary precaution. People with your abilities can be very dangerous. In fact, we hadn't previously met anyone or anything friendly from your world. I'm sure that you understand." Annabelle twirled her long blonde hair with her left hand and said, "Let me tell you something, dearie. There are a lot of bad beings in my world, but not everyone is evil. Many people, such as myself, are oppressed. Those of us who don't hurt other creatures unnecessarily and don't try to gain power at all costs are treated like pawns to be played with. We are social outcasts. Some of us, who are not evil, have escaped through an interdimensional portal and lived quiet lives here in your world. People like that wouldn't have drawn your attention." Kono inhaled deeply and replied, "There are others like you? Are there a lot of beings from your world who don't like the ruler?" Annabelle answered, "Oh yes, there are many who, like me, desire to be free." Kono leaned toward Annabelle and said, "Why don't you fight back? Why don't you join forces and fight for freedom?" Annabelle sighed as her brown eyes appeared sad and answered, "Because the Dark Emperor is too powerful. He has ruled for thousands of years. The Dark Master has easily crushed every uprising. He doesn't only torture and kill those involved in threatening his power, but he also wipes out the neutral family members, along with their entire villages. He is pure, unadulterated evil. I believe that in your world, you would call him the devil incarnate. Kono's eyes grew wide as he gently placed his right hand on Annabelle's folded hands. He then said, "That is truly terrible. I'm very sorry to hear that. It sounds like you and I are on the same side. I think that we might be able to work together. Let me get back to you in a little bit. It's been nice to properly meet you, Annabelle. Oh, and I really am sorry for the way our first introduction went down earlier this afternoon." Agent Kono Castabello had gotten out of his chair and left the room to go consult with Director Michael Glover. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall with a muscular frame, Michael Glover was an imposing figure. The director of the Moon Mist Division was African American. The short, cropped haircut that he wore contributed toward revealing his lively facial expressions. The interview with Annabelle the Witch had yielded productive and unexpected results. Agent Castabello tried to persuade Director Glover to offer Annabelle and her family asylum on Earth in exchange for teaching the agents how to gain passage through the portal. Castabello further argued that Annabelle could be a priceless asset and potential ally. Her knowledge of the alien world on the other side of the portal could offer them the kind of intelligence that they had long desired. More than this, Castabello saw the possibility of forming an alliance with the oppressed and exploited beings in the monster dimension. Director Glover cautiously agreed with Agent Castabello's view. The director was willing to offer Annabelle and her family trans-world asylum, provided that she cooperated with Moon Mist Division. Upon hearing the details of the deal being offered, Annabelle accepted. October 31st, 2022 was the historic day that Moon Mist Division sent a small team through the portal. The team was given 2 objectives to complete. The first objective was reconnaissance. The Moon Mist team was commissioned to stealthily obtain information about the land, its inhabitants, towns, and about the rulers of the realm. The second objective was to locate and bring back Annabelle's mother and sister. The small Moon Mist force was comprised of agents Castabello, Marsh, Stryker, Che, and Annabelle the Witch. Annabelle revealed the mystical words which briefly opened the portal. When the words Yayo, Vukvar, Verelden were spoken, the portal could be crossed. Passage through the interdimensional portal remained possible for 31 seconds after the mystical words were spoken. Agent Lydia Marsh led the way as the Moon Mist team bravely went through the portal. Passing through the portal resulted in feeling butterflies in the stomach and a sensation similar to static electricity throughout the body. It took a mere 3 seconds to pass from one side of the portal to another. Once through the gate to another world, the travelers felt what they dubbed the portal rush. The rush was attributed to the body's release of endorphins. Once through the portal, the Moon Mist team found themselves in a dark cave. Only a faint reddish light emanating from the mouth of the cave kept them from being totally enshrouded by darkness. As they cautiously moved toward the red light, they came to the mouth of the cave. A brilliant waterfall flowed down into a lake. The cave was hidden behind the waterfall. The red light had been caused by a red sun. Filtered by the waterfall, the red rays of the sun entered the cave. Annabelle led the team out of the cave and around the ferocious waterfall as they walked over a rocky ledge. Unlike the blue sky of Earth, the sky here was crimson. The horizon was as a candle dipped in blood. Cotton candy-like clouds floated low on the horizon. The color of these clouds varied from gray to black to orange to green. The skyline was truly remarkable. Agents Castabello, Marsh, Stryker, and Che explained it as a terribly beautiful and ominous sight. The sun, clouds, and sky weren't the only remarkable things. As the Moon Mist team traveled over the rocky ridge, they noticed that they felt lighter and that they could jump higher. Gravity was apparently considerably weaker here. Perhaps this played a role in the size of the living things here in this strange world. Some of the trees and creatures were enormous. The team was amazed by the gargantuan size of some of the trees that they saw. Both remarkably wide and tall, these trees made the visitors from Earth feel small. The spectacular display of the foliage was breathtakingly beautiful. Both the hulking trees and the small trees were adorned with leaves colored in various shades of red, yellow, and orange. This display wasn't seasonal. The leaves appeared like this all year round. Much like vampires, the foliage seemed to remain in an eternal living dead state. This world contained an untold number of mysteries. The team, on the Council of Annabelle, were dressed in gray and black hooded robes. This was the usual attire here, and the team needed to blend in. As the agents headed into a forest, they noted the strange glowing fog. Just as they had routinely encountered on Earth in places where supernatural creatures nested, the fog here glowed with white, orange, and green hues. Yet again, they found that the things of this mysterious world produced a sense of both beauty and terror. Walking through the forest, Annabelle turned to Agent Castabello and said, "Kono, remember what I told you. Do not use your Kaibo powers unless absolutely necessary. If you do have to use them to take out an enemy aggressor, you must kill them and make sure that there are no witnesses. If word got out that the Kaibo are not extinct and that one of them is here in the hallowed Nok Drakun realm, then our plans would be for naught. No creature here can know about us. We have to be stealthy, have a quick look from a safe distance, get my mother and sister, and get out of here. If we fail, if we are discovered, then the Dark Emperor will not allow us to leave, and he will accelerate his plans of the conquest of Earth. Trust me when I tell you that your world is not ready for that." Agent Castabello placed his right hand on Annabelle's shoulder and said, "I understand. If we follow your instructions, then we have a chance to go unnoticed and pull this mission off. We don't want the Dark Emperor to place security guards around the portal. So long as he doesn't know that we have learned how to cross over between worlds, then he will continue to believe that we are in the dark and pose no threat to him here." Walking through the forest, the group came across a 40-yard web with a 10-foot-long spider at the center. The spider was black, with red markings in the shape of a human skull on the back of its abdomen. If it was nighttime, they might have walked right into the web. Even in the daytime, the fog made it difficult to spot the gigantic spider web. They carefully walked around the perilous trap and moved on. Annabelle's family lived nearby in the small village of Bat's Grove. Agents Castabello, Marsh, Stryker, and Che would stay behind near the edge of the woods, while Annabelle would go to the village alone. The homes of Bat's Grove were quaint and looked as though they came out of a fairy tale. This world, however, was no happy fairy tale. It was a realm of living nightmares. About 30 minutes after Annabelle had gone to meet her mother and sister, screams were heard. Voices crying out in pain arose from the village. Alerted by the screeching, the agents looked on. Several vampires were terrorizing some of the villagers of Bat's Grove. 2 male vampires restrained 2 green-skinned men. The third vampire, a female with red hair, assaulted a mother and daughter. She toyed with them as a cat toys with a pair of mice. The agents began to move forward until Castabello assertively but silently signaled them to stop and remain still. Castabello was fighting off the burning desire to intervene and stop this disgusting assault. Every fiber of his being burned with a fire that could only be put out by justice. He felt as though he was being eaten alive from the inside as his conscience, emotions, and reason waged war with each other. He knew that intervening would jeopardize not only their mission, but possibly the fate of Earth. They were under strict orders to watch and remain out of sight. They were not supposed to engage anyone unless they were attacked. With eyes ablaze, Agent Marsh looked at Agent Castabello with an expression of anger, sorrow, and powerlessness. The screams ceased. The female vampire had fed upon and drained the life out of the mother and daughter. The two male vampires had fed upon and killed the two men. The green-skinned, lifeless bodies of a father, an uncle, a mother, and a daughter littered the dirt road in front of the village. The vile vampires laughed and then flew away. Agent Castabello fell to his knees and grasped his head with his hands. An hour after the atrocious murders, Annabelle emerged through the glimmering fog with her mother and sister. Annabelle's mother was very pretty. She had a mixture of blonde and white hair. Her eyes squinted as the skin on her face tightened. Annabelle's sister followed closely behind their mother. She was a brunette whose features looked similar to her older sister, although shorter in stature. Once they all met up at the forest's edge, they immediately went deeper into the woods. There was no time for introductions. They had to get out of there without drawing attention. Now that it was nighttime, the risk of encountering a vampire, a ghoul, a skeleton soldier, or a wicked witch had greatly increased. The realm of Nok Drakun was filled with dangers. The nighttime sky held a large orange moon. It provided enough light for them to travel without using night vision goggles. The infrared goggles weren't a technology that was known of in this alien world. If anyone saw them wearing them, they would stand out and questions would arise. Raising his right arm, with the palm of his hand open, Castabello said, "Hold up. Did you hear that? I think we're being followed." Agent Stryker replied, "Yeah, I heard someone or something rustling in the distance. I hope it's just a harmless animal." A loud roar broke the silence. Agent Che went crashing into a massive tree. A warlock had cast a spell and conjured a powerful but focused wind and directed it at Agent Che. The agents spread out and took cover behind the huge trees. Annabelle, along with her mother and sister, joined hands and stepped forward and said, "You are outnumbered." Stepping closer, the warlock, dressed in a black and red hooded robe, answered, "Maybe so, but you are outpowered." Two large green-skinned trolls roared as they emerged from the fog. Each troll stood over 8 feet tall. The hulking beasts rushed towards the witches. As the witches began to say a spell against the trolls, they were blasted backward by the warlock. Agents Castabello, Marsh, and Stryker charged the trolls with the staffs that Annabelle had given them. They couldn't use guns because doing so would give away their true origins. One troll clobbered Agent Stryker before he could even get a hit in. The powerful blow from the troll sent him flying through the air. Agent Marsh looked at Castabello and said, "Follow me!" Castabello followed Marsh as she ran through the forest. The two trolls rampaged after them. The warlock watched on, laughed, and bellowed, "Cowards! You're no match for me! The trolls knocked over small trees and bushes as they charged after Castabello and Marsh. Loud thuds rang out each time the feet of the trolls hit the ground. It sounded like dinosaurs were crashing through the woods. What chance did the agents stand if they couldn't use firearms, and if Castabello couldn't use his Kai-Bo powers? Certainly they would need a more powerful weapon than a wooden walking staff. These trolls were enormous. Faster and faster, Marsh and Castabello ran. It seemed to be of no use. The trolls were only a step or two behind them. The trolls were about to rip them apart limb from limb, when suddenly Marsh cut to her left and said, "Dive to your left, now!" The trolls were suddenly stuck in place. They had run right into a massive spider web. The gargantuan spider descended and bit the first troll. Then it bit the second troll. Each bite delivered a large and lethal dose of poison. The trolls were dead within minutes. The black spider with the red mark of a human skull on its abdomen then wrapped the trolls up so it could feed on them at its leisure. Annabelle and her family had risen to their feet and set their focus on the warlock. With their hands joined, they cast a spell that entombed the warlock in ice. The witches then said another spell, which shattered the warlock into thousands of tiny pieces. On this particular day, the Moon Mist team was fortunate. Agents Stryker and Che had only been knocked unconscious. They hadn't used any technology from Earth, and Castabello hadn't used his Kai-Bo powers. Not only did they survive and kill the warlock and his trolls, but they did so without drawing the attention of the Dark Emperor. The first mission to the Dark Realm of Nok Drakun had been a success. At last, they had learned how to gain access to the mystical portal to another world. Additionally, the adventure had permitted them to map out some of the strange new world and to retrieve Annabelle's family. No longer would they be forced to always fight defensively. It was now possible for them to carefully plan on returning to what they dubbed the Halloween dimension. Soon, they could take the fight to the dark powers that threaten humanity. Tracking the Master Vampire. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Moon Mist Division tirelessly tracked the Master Vampire, but whenever they believed that they were closing in on him, he had already vanished. The ancient fiend had successfully eluded them time after time. Like fog, he couldn't be grasped. The undead bloodsucker had begun leaving them clues for where he would strike next. Sometimes he would write riddles, or leave more straightforward clues in the victim's blood. The crime scenes were chilling and grotesque. Was the vampire taunting them, or luring them into a trap? The Moon Mist team was unsure of the diabolical creature's intent. One thing that they were sure of was that if they didn't stop the vile vampire, then more bodies would undoubtedly pile up. Whether the undead beast was setting a trap or not didn't matter. They had no choice. Agent Castabello and the team had to follow every clue. On one occasion, the Moon Mist team had tracked the vampire to Pumpkin Town, South Carolina. They were certain that he had been there because he had murdered yet another female victim, and the body carried all the telltale signs. The undead monster made sure that the killing would be attributed to a serial killer that the world called Tut. Like the other recent victims, the young woman's corpse had been completely drained of its blood, and the letters T.U.T. had been carved into her chest. Written on the wall of the gas station next to the corpse were the words, where the Dark Knight operates from. The sickening clue was written with the victim's blood. Adam Gabriel told the team what he thought the clue meant. Pumpkin Town, Coffin Falls, Cemetery Hill, and Reaper's Ridge are the most recent places that the Master had killed. Each name appeared to have a Halloween-like ring to it. Adam said that this clue must have been referring to a certain superhero that kept his secret headquarters in a place called the Batcave. He further explained that he believed that the next killing was going to be at Bat Cave in North Carolina. Bat Cave was a community in Henderson County, North Carolina. It was named after a literal cave of bats. It fit the pattern and the clue. Bat Cave was where the master vampire was going to select his next prey. The Moon Mist team agreed that they needed to travel to Bat Cave. Agents Kono Castabello and Lydia Marsh were impressed with Adam's contributions to the team. Just a short time ago, Adam had been the prisoner of the master vampire. The world had believed that Adam was the serial killer known as Tut, the Undead Terror. It was the Moon Mist Department of the FBI that had worked to clear Adam of all charges. Without the persistent efforts of Moon Mist Director Michael Glover, the FBI would have been content to leave Adam Gabriel as the #1 suspect in the Tut serial killings. Director Michael Glover repeatedly explained to the Bureau how Adam had been framed by the actual serial killer, and how they could explain it to the press. Glover reasoned that while it would be insane to tell the media the whole truth, they could give just enough truth to clear Adam's name. He pitched the idea that they would tell the media that Adam had been the prisoner of the real Tut killer, and that the FBI rescued him from a cave. The Bureau was persuaded, and chose to tell the truth, albeit they left out the vampire bit. While Adam was beyond grateful for having been rescued and then having his name cleared, the scars of his trauma would never fully heal. The murder of his best friend and his year-long captivity left him with PTSD. Although there is no cure for post-traumatic stress disorder, Adam would learn to effectively manage the illness. Another scar left by the unjust events was the scar to his reputation. Even though he had been publicly cleared of any wrongdoing, the fact was that people would always associate him with the Tut killer. For over a year, the media plastered Adam's picture all over TV, the internet, and newspapers. True crime podcasts made innumerable episodes dissecting the case and the life of Adam. Since the Tut killings had become a global sensation, the whole world had not only believed that Adam was the serial killer, but they feared him. The fear and hatred that people had for Adam was of an exponential nature. That kind of profound fear and anger doesn't just go away. It leaves deep scars. The damage from the relentless news coverage had been done. A lesser person probably would have broke down from such heavy pressure. Many would have turned to drugs and alcohol in order to escape it all. Perhaps in the same situation, some folks would have become the very monster that people believed them to be. Everyone has a choice, and Adam made his. He took his path. He wasn't going to be shattered by the fear and injustice of life. He was instead going to shatter fear and injustice. If Agents Castabello and Marsh hadn't rescued Adam from the Master, he would have been imprisoned indefinitely with no hope of escape. If it hadn't been for the Moon Mist Division, the world would still believe that he was a wretched, grotesque serial killer. Owing the Moon Mist Division his life, Adam had pledged his service to them. He wanted revenge. He wanted to stop the Master from hurting anyone else. The fire in his belly desired to put an end to the Master's reign of fear. Kono Castabello, Lydia Marsh, and Adam Gabriel planned their next move. They considered that even if the Bat Cave was the correct location of the Master's next attack, it was likely a trap. The Master was cunning and preternaturally intelligent. Not only was he smart, fast, and immensely powerful, but he was immortal. They weren't even sure that they could destroy him even if they did find him. Castabello would bring his Amun-Ra cross, but he wasn't certain that it could kill a Master Vampire. He knew that the Amun-Ra cross had injured the Master when last they met. Castabello also knew that he had trained hard and long since their first encounter. He had grown strong in his Kaibo abilities. Castabello convinced himself that he couldn't fail. He believed that the Master was no match for his Kaibo powers. 10 FBI agents flew down to the airport in Charlotte, and then drove to meet the Moon Mist team in Asheville, North Carolina. After Agents Castabello and Marsh briefed the tactical squad on the mission, they repeatedly went over the plan. Tomorrow at dawn, they would drive to Bat Cave to scout the cave and the surrounding community. After a long day, they got some much-needed sleep. Waking up shortly before sunrise, the team got coffee and breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the hotel lobby. The joys of having a coffee with the sunrise was a joy that a vampire could never have. The group was confident and ready to get the job done. Driving from Asheville to Henderson County, the brilliant mountain range slowly became illuminated by the rising sun. The view was breathtaking. The winding road going up and down the hills gave the impression that they were on a roller coaster. Trees created canopies in all directions. Some of these trees were massive and must have been hundreds of years old. Vampires and trees can each grow to be hundreds or thousands of years old. It's interesting how the wood from a tree can kill most vampires. As the team reached Bat Cave, they split up into 2 groups. 2 SUVs went to the Bat Cave community, which is located on the banks of the Broad River. The remaining 2 SUVs drove up Bat Cave Mountain. Castabello, Marsh, and 4 agents went into Bat Cave. As they approached the dark entrance, they noticed how unusually quiet it was. Despite the fact that it was still morning, no birds could be heard chirping. They didn't see any deer or rabbits or squirrels. What should have seemed natural instead seemed unnatural. The dead silence unnerved the agents. As Castabello and his team crossed the threshold of the cave, they transferred from the light into the dark. They turned on their flashlights and observed the impressive granite deposits that surrounded them. Bat Cave wasn't open to the public, so the team didn't expect to encounter anyone there. At least not anyone alive. With his Amun-Ra cross in his right hand and a flashlight in his left hand, Castabello explored the cave. He saw another victim. The corpse of a pretty young brunette was hanging from a rope. Her body had of course been drained of its blood. Carved on her bosom was the message, "My revenge is at hand." As Castabello shined a light on the wall, he saw the bone-chilling sight of a second macabre message. Written on the wall of the cave in the victim's blood were the words, "You're next." A loud boom shook the cave. The sound was deafening. It sounded like there was a rock collapse. Castabello turned around and ran toward the entrance. Rocks had blocked the mouth of the cave. The cave had swallowed them. There was no way out. Screams rang out and echoed in the cave. The light from flashlights darted all over the place as 2 agents were dragged into the darkness of the depths of the cave. 4 vampires tore into the agents' flesh and gorged on their blood. "Over here! Everyone together! Stand back to back!" Castabello yelled. Marsh and Castabello stood back to back in a defensive posture. The two other agents did the same. Sinister snarling emanated from the darkness. Marsh had a wooden stake in her right hand, as her left hand feverishly shined the flashlight in multiple directions. A male vampire leapt toward Marsh, and she thrust the stake into his ribcage. The vampire ruptured into tiny, bloody pieces that splattered all over the granite. Two more male vampires came rushing toward the agents. Castabello extended his left hand and used his Kaibo powers to force the vampires against the wall. As he pinned them against the wall, he used the Amun-Ra cross to shoot a laser through their hearts. The two vampires burst into flames. A strong, stiff, cool breeze slapped the team members' faces. A split second later, the sound of steel and glass smacking against rock echoed in the cave. The sound was caused by their flashlights hitting the walls of the cave. The light bulbs had been shattered. A powerful and exceptionally quick vampire had run faster than the wind as he knocked their flashlights out of their hands. One by one, in rapid succession, each flashlight had been broken against the granite. Darkness surrounded them. Their hearts pounded within their chests. Their breathing quickened as each of the agents considered their available options. Blind, trapped in a cave surrounded by vampires, their prospects of escaping with their lives didn't seem good. The confusion was compounded by the surprise of it all. It was all supposed to have been an easy recon mission. It was daytime, and they hadn't expected to come across any vampires in the cave. They had been manipulated into feeling a false sense of security. The daylight hours were supposed to have been the time when humans held the advantage over vampires. Furthermore, the Moon Mist team had followed the Master's clues from one location to another, and each and every time, the Master had been out of their reach. Subconsciously, at least, the agents hadn't expected a different result here at Bat Cave. They had figured that they would find clues in the cave, possibly even the corpse of another victim. They didn't think that the vampires would be there waiting for them after the sun had risen. While they expected that the Master might set a trap for them, they had expected any trap to have been sprung after sunset. A familiar, hate-filled voice spoke from the darkness.
"Fools! Did you really think that you were safe? Did you really want to find me? You pathetic mortals are no match for me."
The sinister voice belonged to the Master. Agent Castabello answered. "I seem to recall having kicked your ugly, pale ass the last time that we met." The Master responded.
"You were lucky the last time. I was surprised that you had found me, and I had been even more surprised by the Amun-Ra cross that you wielded. That won't happen again."
Castabello confidently said, "I've grown more powerful since the last you saw me. You've made a grave mistake. It's daytime. I have been trained in the ways of the Kaibo. I have an Amun-Ra cross, and you can't flee from the cave, because the sun will scorch you if you do." Shrill shrieks of laughter reverberated throughout the dark cave. The Master then replied,
"Your pride is an endearing quality, but I will prove that your arrogance is quite unfounded. Your Kaibo sorcery does not scare me. I have slaughtered countless numbers of your Kaibo ancestors throughout the millennia. I assure you that they had far more training than you. I am a god. Today I slaughter your friends and feast upon your blood. Then later tonight I'll get my revenge and reclaim what was taken from me. Adam will become my slave once more."
Consumed by anger, Castabello screamed as he began shooting the Amun-Ra cross toward the sound of the Master's voice. The light produced from the rays of the Amun-Ra cross revealed a horrific scene. The Master's arm had ripped through the chest of the two agents who stood next to Castabello and Marsh. The fiend was so powerful that, with one strike, he had punched through the chest of the agent facing him, as his hand continued through the back of the second agent. The infernal beast had penetrated both of their rib cages and ripped out their hearts in a single blow. The speed of the attack made it impossible for anyone to respond in time to do anything about it. Castabello tried to aim for the Master, but it was too late. The Master had already materialized right by Castabello as he snatched the Amun-Ra cross out of Castabello's hands. The Master destroyed the ancient weapon with his bare hands. Any hope that Castabello and Marsh had of survival was crushed along with the Amun-Ra cross. The Master could smell their despair. That particular scent excited his bloodlust. With blinding speed, the ancient evil grabbed Castabello by his throat and lifted him up high off of the floor of the cave. Marsh lunged at the Master, but he hit her with the back of his right hand. The blow knocked her against the wall of the cave with great violence. The Master then threw Castabello against the opposite wall of the cave. A sickening crack was heard. It was the sound of Castabello's right arm breaking. In the blink of an eye, the Master had moved right on top of Castabello. He lifted the agent up and manhandled him. He then grabbed his left arm so that he couldn't use any of his Kaibo abilities to fend off the assault. Then the Master sank his fangs into Castabello's neck. The bite of the Master felt like the most painful bee sting. Castabello helplessly groaned in pain as the Master gulped up his blood. Kaibo blood was a rare delicacy for vampires. No vampire had tasted Kaibo blood for ages. The fiendish vampire went into a feeding frenzy. Tunnel vision ensued. It was a blood tunnel, and all the ancient vampire could see was blood. Rare, rich, exquisite blood flowed like a river from the prey to the immortal predator. A torrent of dark pleasure flooded throughout the vampire's undead body. It was vampire nirvana. Rays of light entered the mouth of the cave. A small opening in the hundreds of rocks that had blocked the cave had now appeared. It was now possible to see what was going on in the cave. Many vampires watched from the shadows of the cave. The Master was oblivious to the change. He only saw the blood. "Holy Mother of God," said the voice of a man as he entered the cave. It was Adam. Adam quickly used a mirror to redirect sunlight towards the Master Vampire. The light hit the Master's face, and his pale flesh began to turn a hot blue color as it sizzled. Smoke rose off of the beast's flesh as the smell of burning skin spread through the cave. The pain snapped the Master out of his blood tunnel vision. He reflexively let go of Castabello, and Castabello's body dropped to the floor like a dead thing. Lydia Marsh had suffered a severe concussion, but she momentarily recovered enough of her senses to drive a stake through the fiend's heart. The Master screamed in pain. Marsh fell down again. Her heroic attack had taken all that was left of her energy. Adam cried out, "Annabelle! Now! Get them out now!" More rocks had been removed from the mouth of the cave, and more light shone through. The Master grabbed the wooden stake and pulled it out from his chest. He pointed to Castabello and Marsh and yelled,
Get them! Don't let them escape!
An FBI agent entered the cave with a mirror. He and Adam used the mirrors to redirect light towards the oncoming vampire horde. When the light hit the vampires, they burst into horrible flames as they screeched in torment. The sunlight had damaged and hurt the Master, but it hadn't destroyed him yet. These vampire minions, on the other hand, were being burnt to bits. The vampires kept coming. Agents Castabello and Marsh were too deep into the cave for the light from the entrance to reach them, and the light from the mirrors wasn't going to be sufficient to protect them from this horde of bloodsuckers. If the Master recovered any time soon, he'd be able to snatch up Castabello and Marsh and drag them into the dark abyss of this massive cave system. The vampires obeyed the Master, even unto death. They were his slaves. They were closing in on Castabello and Marsh. If Castabello wasn't dead already, he would be soon. A hideous female vampire reached for Castabello when he and Marsh were dragged with sensational speed. An unseen force had pulled Castabello and Marsh to and then through the mouth of the cave. They were surrounded by light. The fiery sun bathed them in light. Annabelle, the witch, had used magic to open the mouth of the cave. She then used a spell to snatch the agents from the literal jaws of death. When Adam and the team of agents investigating the Bat Cave community by the river weren't able to contact the team at the cave, they mobilized. They drove to the cave as fast as they could. Seeing that the entrance to the cave had been filled with rocks, they had sprung into action. Fortunately for Castabello and Marsh, Adam had called Annabelle the night before and asked her if she wanted to go on a road trip to North Carolina. Annabelle jumped at the opportunity to explore more of this strange, earthly world. The Moon Mist team raced to get Castabello and Marsh to the hospital. Castabello had turned white. He had lost a lot of blood, and he was at death's door. Once at the hospital, the doctors immediately began giving him a blood transfusion. The Master had drained him of copious amounts of blood. As a precaution, Castabello was given antibiotics and a series of rabies shots. The doctors knew that he had been attacked and viciously bitten by a wild beast, but they didn't know that the beast was a hellish vampire master. After Castabello's condition stabilized, the doctors set his broken arm. Agent Marsh was tended to and placed on concussion protocol. The Moon Mist team did not go back to Bat Cave that day. They knew that even if they could defeat the Master, they almost certainly wouldn't be able to do so without Castabello and his Kaibo powers. The loss of the Amun-Ra cross was an additional devastating blow. Even if they had a weapon that could kill the Master, they wouldn't have been able to find him in that cave system. If he didn't want to be found, then he wouldn't be found. There were simply too many chambers and tunnels for him to hide. Had the Moon Mist team taken 100 agents to Bat Cave, it wouldn't have ended well. It would have been an absolute bloodbath. The Master once again seemed untouchable. He was exponentially quicker than they were, stronger than they were, and they didn't know if he could be destroyed. How could they protect people from him? How could they fight this monster? Could they win? The Dark Rider, Murder by Proxy. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. He followed the hooded figure into the foggy forest. It was night. Light posts appeared as sentinels watching over the trail. Under ordinary conditions, these lights provided more than adequate illumination of the trail. This night, however, was different. The light caused the thick fog to glow, but it failed to provide visibility. Visibility was noticeably worse than it would have been walking on a lightless path without fog. At least under those conditions, the half moon would have provided sufficient light. As things were, the water droplets within the fog had caused the light from both the moon and the lamp posts to refract and create a murky veil. It was an ominous sight, almost an unearthly atmosphere. Carlos watched as the man in the hood deftly ran alongside the fog-shrouded trail. On several instances, the man suddenly stopped. Then he'd tilt his head back and swivel it side to side. Next, he'd spontaneously sprint further ahead. His movements seemed inhuman. The mannerisms were reminiscent of a dog tracking an animal in the wilderness. It was as though the man in the hood could see and move perfectly in the dark fog-covered woods. A barred owl called out into the night. "Hoo hoo chahoo!" It sounded as if the mysterious creature of the night was asking, "Who cooks for you?" Around 10 seconds later, another owl responded with the same vocalization. The pair of owls continued to call to each other as the distance between them grew shorter each time. An eerie howling wind along with barred owl calls were the only sound in the woods. The man in the hood remained silent as he swiftly sprinted toward some unseen target. The strangeness of the man's behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. Carlos and the owls keenly watched the mysterious man in the hoodie as he stalked the misty night. It was as though the owls themselves sensed something sinister, unnatural, and perhaps supernatural. Carlos was in a state of mind that was confused, concerned, and fearful. His reasoning was not right. His mind was as foggy as the evening landscape which surrounded him. He had always possessed a sharp mind. Critical thinking was a skill that his friends and family had always admired in him. Perceiving subtle details of people, places, and events was something that he always excelled at. On this night, things were different. His mind was jumbled. He felt as though he had been heavily intoxicated, but he hadn't had any drinks, nor had he taken any drugs. When he tried to think about any detail, the thought would fade away. It was as if his thoughts were like smoke that couldn't be grasped. The thoughts would repeatedly slip through his hands. A memory, or rather a partial memory, returned to Carlos. The image of him closing up Java Nirvana, the coffee cafe that he owned, came to his mind. He saw images of the cafe, him locking up the door, and rain falling down on his car. Next, he saw a pretty young woman as feelings of anger and fear swirled throughout his being. Then he saw an altercation with the young woman. The image of a pale-looking girl lunging at him briefly popped into his head. The memories and images vanished just as quickly as they had appeared out of thin air. When he tried to focus on any particular image, it would dissipate. The harder he tried to focus on a memory, the sooner it would vanish. Again and again he tried to remember, but again and again it was of no use. He grew increasingly frustrated. It faded away just like dreams fade away upon waking up from a sleep. He wondered whether or not the images and memories were from a dream, or even if he was currently dreaming. All of his memories were fractured and disjointed, just as is the case with dreams. Nothing made sense. A dream-like fog had settled into his mind, and he questioned what was real and what was not real. Wrestling with this madness, Carlos continued to follow the hooded figure through the foggy forest. He couldn't recall why he had to follow the man in the hood, but he simply knew that he had to. Something in the core of his very being demanded that he track the man. The barred owls continued to hoot in the night. The man in the hoodie had run to a tree and stopped dead in his tracks. Crouching down behind an old oak tree, he could have been mistaken for a statue of a gargoyle. The thick blanket of fog made the crouching hooded figure look like a sentinel of a Gothic castle. Like a banshee, the disturbing man appeared to be a harbinger of death. A teenage boy appeared. He was walking his beloved mutt. He was only 20 yards away from the disturbing man in the hood. The boy was walking right towards him. The man was downwind from them. Had he been upwind of them, the trusty dog likely would have picked up his scent. Carlo shouted, "Boy, look out! Run back now!" The boy continued to walk further forward. Suddenly, the crouching figure lunged at the boy. With great violence, the man had knocked the boy to the forest floor. The dog growled and then attacked the attacker. Though the dog had drawn blood, the attacker swatted him away like a fly. The 60-pound dog had been tossed over 20 yards away. The boy's furry friend smacked into a tree. He was knocked out. The man in the hood pinned the teenage boy's arms to the leaf-littered floor with great ease. Though the boy was 16 years old and a varsity football player, he couldn't budge his attacker's grip. It was as though his attacker had the strength of 10 men. Carlos tried to pull the man in the hood off of the boy, but it was of no use. He couldn't get a grip on him. He pulled back his right leg and coiled it, before punting the man's head. Horrified, Carlos watched as his right foot passed harmlessly through the man's head. Carlos was stunned. He didn't understand how it was possible. He hadn't missed the mark. He was right on target, but the blow passed through the man. As the man pulled back his head, Carlos saw him clearly. Carlos's jaw dropped to the ground as he staggered backwards. What he saw was impossible. Yet he saw it, and he couldn't unsee it. The face he saw staring back at him was his own. The man in the hood was his mirror image. Bewildered, Carlos stared silently for what felt like an eternity. The man in the hood opened his mouth wide. 2 sharp fangs extended from the pale-faced man's upper jaw. Next, like a serpent, he struck the boy's throat with a vicious bite. Blood spurted out of the boy's neck as it gushed into the creature's mouth. Some of the blood splattered onto the leaf-covered ground. The man was a vampire. In a frenzy, he greedily gulped up the warm, life-giving blood of the handsome teenager. Carlos snapped out of it and yelled, "Stop it! Stop it! Get off of him, you monster!" There was no response. Carlos again tried to stop the beast. He cocked his right hand and launched a big roundhouse right to the vampire's jaw. Once again, his hand had passed harmlessly straight through the vampire. Not only hadn't he been able to strike the undead creature, but he hadn't even been able to feel any physical sensation at all. Confounded and desperate, he looked for a large stick or a rock to use as a weapon. He saw a large stick, but when he went to pick it up, his hand passed right through it. Raucous, monkey-like howling sounds filled the foggy forest. It was the sound of a pair of barred owls getting ready to mate. It seemed as though the vampire bloodlust had excited the nocturnal predatory owls. Helpless horror and pure despair flooded his soul. Carlos was watching himself as his own body attacked a teenage boy. His mouth had torn open the boy's jugular, and his lips sucked the life out of an innocent kid. He was watching a murder, and he was the murderer. He wondered if he was possessed, or if he was having some kind of psychotic break. He was in a nightmare, and it was a nightmare that he wouldn't wake up from. This was a living nightmare. Carlos couldn't make sense of any of this. How could he be a killer? How was it that he could watch himself as though he was watching a movie? If he was a killer, how in the world did he get to be so strong? How did he have fangs? Why was he drinking innocent human blood? Was he a vampire? Those were the insane questions that Carlos pondered until the boy was dead. Once the boy had been killed, Carlos feverishly looked on as a partly translucent shape rose out of the corpse. The shape looked like the boy, but it was ethereal. It was the ghost of the young man. The boy's spirit squinted his eyes and stumbled around confusedly. Then the boy looked at Carlos and said, "You! What did you do to me?" Carlos answered, "That wasn't me. I'm so sorry. I tried to help you." The spirit of the boy then faded away. Carlos observed that the ghost faded in and out for several minutes. Each time the boy appeared, he seemed confused. He didn't seem to know that he was dead. That's when it all suddenly came back to Carlos. He finally remembered it all. He had left work the previous night, just as he always had, when a strange woman approached him in the parking lot. The dark-haired, pale-skinned young woman smiled at him as she walked closer toward him. He had noted that while she was very attractive, she also had a wild look about her. She seemed to be both sexy and dangerous. Something inside of him sensed an unnatural presence. It was as though he was simultaneously drawn to and repulsed by her. The seductive woman was about 25 yards away from Carlos when he curled his lips, gave a half-smile, and quickly opened the door of his car. Within an instant, she was upon him as she slammed the door of his car shut. He was startled. He realized that there was no way that a human could cover so many yards so fast. Even if such a speed were possible to achieve, why would she have sprinted toward him to slam his door closed and to pin him up against his car? Fear rushed through his body. He knew something was very wrong. The mysterious white-fleshed woman, less than an inch from his face, stared at him. She looked at him like she wanted to devour him. Right as he was about to say something, she lunged at his neck and bit him. He felt a terrible sting as her teeth pierced his flesh. Carlos struggled to escape her clutches, but he failed. She was stronger than anyone he had ever met. Even though she couldn't have weighed more than 110 pounds soaking wet, she had a machine-like grip. She possessed an inhuman strength. He was also discovering that she possessed an inhuman, insatiable hunger. She rapidly guzzled his hot blood as an athlete guzzles iced tea after a hard workout. The world began to spin as he grew ever more lightheaded. A fog fell across his mind as he found it nearly impossible to think. His legs felt like they weighed 500 pounds. Weaker and weaker, his body was unable to support itself. Only the vice-like grip of the vampire kept him upright against his silver car. As his consciousness faded further away, the incredible weight that he had felt throughout his body transitioned into an indescribable weightlessness. So much blood had been taken from him, and it caused him to feel as though he was floating in outer space. As his heartbeat slowed, his life flashed before his eyes. He had accepted that he was about to die. He accepted that he would never fall in love again, get married, have children, or expand his coffee shop into a successful franchise. He knew that he would never look into his old high school sweetheart's eyes again and tell her that he still loves her. When he was finally at death's door, the vampire slit her wrist and forced her blood into his mouth. Carlos wanted to resist, but he was so weak that he couldn't raise up more than a whimper in his defense. The vile vampire made him swallow her cursed blood. Her infernal blood tasted smoky and bitter. She had completely violated and dominated him. Several minutes after the accursed blood went down his throat, he began to convulse. In agonizing death throes, his body writhed on the dirty ground. Then he exhaled one final breath in the form of a terrible death rattle. He was dead. The infernal blood of the vampire had finished him off. Many believe that death always ends suffering once and for all. Those who think that way are mistaken. Sometimes a suffering so terrible that words can't adequately describe it ensues after death. Sometimes death isn't the end. Sometimes death is only the beginning of an unfathomable suffering and the birth of a soul-crushing pain. This horrible death is the kind of death to which Carlos had been delivered. After he had been mercilessly killed by a powerful preternatural creature, his soul departed from his body. No dazzling white light awaited him. No beautiful tunnel appeared. There was no comforting presence coming to soothe his aching soul. What waited for him instead was a nightmarish fog of confusion. As his spirit alternated between fading into and then out of the earthly plane, so too did his memories come and go. At first, he realized that he was dead, but that realization soon vanished. Dead and separated from his body, he watched as the female vampire went inside of his car and broke his windshield from the inside out. Next, she flung his car into a tree. She then picked up a sharp shard of glass and used it to slash his throat. This post-mortem mutilation hid the fang marks. Emergency responders might well come to think that a car accident had caused the loss of so much blood. The evil vampire proceeded to dump Carlos's corpse onto the edge of the lake that bordered Java Nirvana. Next, with great sorrow, Carlos watched as the emergency responders pulled his lifeless body from the edge of the lake and transported it to the morgue. He remained with his corpse, but he continued to fade into and out of our existence. Then, the night after his murder, he looked on in horror as a shadowy, inhuman spirit manifested itself in the morgue. The shadow being had the basic shape of a man's body, but had a grotesque dragon's head. It was the most frightening sight that he had ever seen. Though Carlos no longer had a body, he felt a bitter cold. The ghastly horror escalated. The inhuman spirit entered the deceased body. Carlos watched helplessly as his dead body rose up from the cold slab in the morgue. The skin looked like dirty snow. His reanimated corpse began to walk. The undead body found a locker, broke it open, and stole a gray hoodie and black jeans. Carlos was speechless as he saw his corpse dress itself in the stolen clothes. Carlos followed his walking corpse out of the morgue. Though his memory shattered as he had faded into and out of the earthly realm numerous times, he retained a singular focus. He knew that he had to follow his dead and hijacked body. Even when he had forgotten that he had been killed and that some kind of demon was possessing his body, he retained the compulsion to follow the man in the hoodie. When all of these memories came back to Carlos all at once, it was like a tsunami. Forgotten images and feelings made him drop to the ground as he held his head in his hands. Since he no longer had a physical body, he wondered if his reaction was a force of habit. Pain, guilt, remorse, fear, and a profound loneliness raged through his suffering soul. Watching his corpse kill a young man had brought all of his memories back. Carlos now understood that his body belonged to a vampire. The only body that he had ever had was now possessed by forces of darkness. There was nothing that he could do about it. He couldn't even punch the vampire. As far as he knew, he couldn't pick up any objects or influence the physical world at all. Nevertheless, he was determined to continue following his stolen corpse. He wasn't going to give up yet. More pain awaited him. Of that he was certain. The torment of watching yourself maul and extinguish the life of another is indescribable. It was all so surreal. This was the worst nightmare that he had ever had, and he was living it. Or perhaps, given the circumstances, it's more proper to say that he was dying it. Vampire Carlos was on the move again. The real Carlos felt an awful despair when he realized where the fiend was headed. They were only a few houses away from his former high school sweetheart. This monster was going to visit his first love. Although they weren't a couple anymore, they remained friends through the years. She didn't know it, but in the secret chamber of his heart, he never stopped loving her. A white-hot anger rose like a furious fire in his soul. The rage was amplified by the deepest sadness and despair that he had ever known. Sure, he had felt these emotions as Vampire Carlos killed the boy, but now it was magnified. The thought of his dear friend meeting the same horrendous, unnatural death was unbearable. With each step he took toward fate, the sorrow, rage, and despair grew in magnitude. When the real Carlos focused on his first love and her house, he suddenly found himself there. He had spontaneously transported his spirit into her house. Astonished that he had traveled at the speed of thought, the eyes of his spirit grew wide. There was no time to consider the awesomeness of what he had just done. He knew that the evil, undead imposter was only minutes or perhaps moments away. He had seen how quickly vampires could move when they so desired. "Lydia, it's me! I'm right here!" Carlos shouted. Though Lydia was standing only a foot away from him, she didn't hear him and she couldn't see him. Growing frustrated, Carlos shouted, "It's not him! He's not who he seems to be! Don't trust him!" Carlos repeated those words as a mantra. They became a desperate prayer. As he recited those words time and time again, an unexpected thing happened. The rage, sorrow, and despair had been swallowed up by a new feeling. It was love. Yes, a pure, deep, and sweet feeling of love had enveloped his soul. He could feel a great power in this love. A knock on the door caused him to feel like a deer caught in headlights. It was the murderous vampire. Lydia pulled out her phone to check the video from her security camera. She opened the app to see the footage as the voice at the door said, "Lydia, it's me, Carlos. Something terrible happened. I need to talk to you. Let me in." She put her phone down on the end table without looking at it. The footage showed something of crucial importance. The security footage revealed an empty porch. No one appeared in the video. Had the vampire not spoken to her through the front door when he did, she would have been alerted to the danger. Her silky black hair bounced as she walked toward the door. Lydia opened the door and said, "Carlos, come on in. What's wrong?" The vampire walked through the door. The ghost of Carlos felt love surge through his spirit again as he said, "Lydia, he is a vampire. That is not Carlos." Lydia squinted her beautiful eyes, glanced to her left, and smoothly slid her hand under a shelf near the door. The vampire had passed her and was now several feet into her house. He turned around and smiled. He flashed his fangs and then said, "Lydia Marsh, the fearless FBI vampire hunter.
Your time is up. The master sends his regards."
The vampire threw himself toward her. With his hands extended, he looked like a demon flying through the air. As his hands began to grab her, a sharp wooden stake pierced his ribcage and went into his heart. His body immediately exploded into thousands of tiny bits and pieces. The spirit of the real Carlos had succeeded in getting his message to Lydia. She had heard his thoughts in her mind. It sounded like the voice of Carlos, but it sounded even more authentic and clear. It was some kind of mental telepathy, and it probably saved her life. After she got the mental message, she slowly and stealthily put her hand around one of the various wooden stakes that she had hidden around the house. Special Agent Lydia Marsh was still suffering the nasty effects of the concussion that she had received by the hands of the Master. The Batcave incident had left her and Agent Castabello wounded, and neither had been cleared to return to duty. The Master was now hunting them instead of merely toying with them. She called Adam Gabriel and Annabelle and asked them to come over her house, but to be very careful. She told them that the game had changed, and that they were now the hunted. After Lydia hung up the phone, she began to cry. With the assault thwarted, her adrenaline dissipated. She finally had time to process what had just taken place. Her old high school sweetheart, her first love, had turned into a blood-sucking monster and tried to kill her. She then killed him, and his accursed undead corpse exploded all over her house. That's more than anyone should ever have to process. She cried as she realized what it meant. It meant that her first love and her good friend Carlos had been killed by a vampire. It also meant that he had been turned into a vampire. Lydia wasn't sure what happened to the souls of people who were turned. She didn't know if Carlos was at peace, or if he had lost his soul to the foul beast that had turned him. As terrible as those things were to consider, there was something that really weighed on her conscience. The message that the vampire relayed made clear that Carlos wasn't simply an unlucky victim in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, it was obvious that the Master had chosen Carlos. He knew that Carlos was close to Lydia, and that she trusted him and cared for him. Carlos was a pawn in the Master's diabolical game. She couldn't help but think that the horrific fate of Carlos was her fault. Had she not been a vampire hunter and a member of the Moon Mist Division, then Carlos would still be alive. As she sat and stared at the gruesome remains of her ex-boyfriend, she sobbed uncontrollably. She recalled the time that Carlos asked her out. Then she thought about their first kiss, the times they'd walked together at night, the laughs that they shared, and the real love that they had felt for one another. The spirit of Carlos watched her and sat beside her. She couldn't see it or feel it, but he placed his hand in hers. A knock on the door was followed by Annabelle saying, "Hey girl, we're here and we ain't no vamps." Lydia opened the door and let her teammates in. Adam and Annabelle gasped when they saw the gruesome scene. It wasn't that they hadn't seen the disgusting mess left behind by vampires that had been destroyed, but they were surprised to see it in Lydia's home. No team member had been attacked in this way before. Lydia filled them in on the nerve-wracking events. Annabelle gently placed her hand in Lydia's hand, held it, and said, "Lydia, sweetie, it's okay. Do you feel that? It's Carlos. He's holding your hand right now. He loves you and he wants to console you." Lydia wiped tears from her eyes and replied, "Yeah, that's a nice sentiment, but I'll never know where he is. No one can know. He's gone." Annabelle smiled and squeezed Lydia's hand and responded, He isn't gone. I can assure you that he is right here because I'm looking at him. He is trying to hold your hand. He's been sitting right beside you since we got here." Lydia's eyes widened as she said, "You really can see him? You can see ghosts?" "Yes, hun, I really can see Carlos. He's a handsome soul. I can see spirits sometimes. Usually I can only see them if they want to be seen. In this case, your sweet friend really wants to be seen and heard," answered Annabel. Lydia smiled and told everyone how special Carlos was. Annabel relayed the story that Carlos had told her. He described everything in great detail. Lydia again began to sob after she heard the terrible story. Annabel put her arms around her friend and said, "Remember that none of this is your fault. Carlos now knows the kind of work that you really do for the FBI. He doesn't blame you at all. He is amazed at how strong you are and how much light you bring to the world." Lydia replied, "Yeah, but I put a stake through his heart. I literally drove a stake through his rib cage." Annabel looked into Lydia's eyes and said, "You put a stake through the undead heart of a monster. That wasn't Carlos anymore. An evil, inhuman spirit that never lived in a physical body possessed his corpse. That's how these kinds of vampires operate. Some willingly surrender their wills and souls to serve the master, and then he turns them. In other cases, these vampires force their accursed blood into the mouths of their dying victims. When no consent is given, the mortal dies. The soul is separated from its rightful body. Then, on the following night, a dark rider comes. The dark rider enters the accursed body, which has been resurrected by vampire blood." Lydia sniffled and questioned, "The dark rider? So Carlos wasn't inside of that thing? He wasn't a prisoner of the evil blood?" Annabel continued to explain. "No, dearie, Carlos wasn't inside of the vampire. However, his soul was bound to its former body, in a manner of speaking. When a dark rider takes over the vampire body, the original inhabitant of the bodily vessel is tethered to the stolen body. The soul walks in sorrow and distress unless or until the vampire is destroyed and the body is finally put to rest. The soul basically becomes a passenger that is destined to walk the earth and see the carnage caused by a dark rider who uses the person's very own body to unleash terror. Carlos didn't kill anyone, but he was helpless to stop the dark rider. All he could do was watch. The murder of the young teenager earlier tonight was a murder by proxy. Had you not driven a stake through the vampire's heart, Carlos would have been destined to experience a never-ending nightmare. You expelled the Dark Rider from its host. You have saved Carlos from unimaginable pain. After we give Carlos a proper burial, he'll be able to move on and find true peace." Lydia cried once more, but this time the tears were tears of joy. I hope that you enjoyed your stay here at the haunted Half Moon Inn. The Master requests that you consider supporting me and the inn by becoming a slave. A patron of mine on Patreon. The Half Moon Inn needs your support to keep the doors open. You wouldn't want the residents here to feel forgotten and abandoned, would you? Creating quality scary stories to share with you is very important to me. Running this inn of horror is a passion of mine, and I would truly appreciate your support. The world is hurting. It needs more horror. Help me to heal the world through horror. Together, with your help, we could haunt this world one home at a time. Until next time, always remember, just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there.